Welcome to Tech to Gov. My name is Andreen Soli. I'm the director of the Public Interest Tech program at New America. We are kicking off our programming today, joined by Jen Easterly, the director of CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Hello, Jen. It's wonderful to see you. Welcome.
Thanks so much. I'm so glad to be here. I will just get started then. Look, I really appreciate the opportunity. It's a real honor to be part of tech.gov, the National Forum and Job Fair, and it's great that we have so many government partners coming together with the tech community to talk about what we do, the importance of our mission, and the incredible impact that you can have by embracing the call to public service. So I do want to thank Tech2Gov and all of the leaders here for bringing together the group and really helping to highlight the importance of answering that call to public service. You know, tech.gov has recognized two, frankly, unacceptable state of affairs. The first one is an underutilized but highly qualified pool of individuals that are looking for meaningful technical work. And then secondly, an understaffed public sector workforce in need of individuals with technical expertise. And fortunately, here's a platform that simultaneously addresses both issues, which is why I was psyched to be able to speak today. So the work of the coalition, the resources and programs, including today's virtual forum and the job fair, are really helping to bring much needed clarity to what, from the outside, I know can seem like a daunting federal hiring process. As director of CISA, America's Cyber Defense Agency, I'm clearly biased, but I truly believe that working at CISA is one of the best jobs you can have in government. And I've had the opportunity to work in a lot of diverse roles throughout my career in both the private sector and the public sector. And, you know, the CISA team, and frankly, our partners across the federal government who we work with every day are really amazing and creative and collaborative. So it's a real pleasure to be back in public service after spending about 4.5 years in the private sector at Morgan Stanley. And I know, having been both in government and out of government, that being a part of government has not always been an easy thing. The federal government hiring process can be at times very cumbersome, very frustrating. We are working hard on it, but I think it still takes too long. Training outside of traditional classroom isn't always valued the way that it should be. And compensation is not equivalent to the private sector. And we've heard all of these concerns. And, you know, we're doing something to fix it. It's frankly been one of my top priorities since I joined the agency over 2 years ago. And I'm excited to say that we are, in fact, making progress. We've hired almost 1,500 new teammates just over the past 2 years. And that includes dozens of employees through our cyber talent management system, which is essentially a new personnel system that was launched in late 2021 to enable us to streamline our hiring process, to implement meaningful career development opportunities, and to provide more competitive compensation structures. Now, all that said, nobody joins the government to get rich. The reason that people join the government and really answer the call to public service is about the incredible mission, the opportunity to make a difference while serving the nation and the American people. And in pursuit of making our nation safer from the myriad of threats that we deal with on a minute by minute basis, we've expanded the innovation and the creativity and diversity of our team. We've not only become better at what we do, but we've grown stronger as well by incorporating amazing private sector talent into CISA. So we've, just to name a few, we've hired Bob Lord, who was a CISO at Twitter and CISO at Yahoo and CISO at the Democratic National Committee. Jack Cable is one of the premier security researchers in the world. Grant Dasher joined us from Google. We have Ava Black, who's an expert in open source, who joined us to strengthen our open source software security program. And just a few months ago, Peter Zatko, also known as Mudge, joined our team. And And many of you may know Mudge drove some of the early technical work on a range of vulnerability classes that we all take for granted now, like buffer overflows and timing attacks and command injection. And he really helped pioneer the field of responsible vulnerability disclosure. And with us, he's been working on software transparency and quantifying and measuring the impact on cyber defense solutions on the underlying ecosystem of the adversaries that we deal with. And he is back in government. He's been in and out of government, where he's been incredibly successful in both. But when I asked him what keeps bringing him back to government, his response was the potential for impact. And as I said, I could not agree more. The feeling of being able to affect change and make the world safer, that mission is just unbeatable. I loved being in the private sector. I really enjoyed my time there. But the feeling that I get from being in government, able to make a difference every single day for the safety and security of the American people, is frankly an honor and a privilege every day. And I'd say, people don't need to come in for a career. Really, I'm quite happy if incredible talent from the private sector comes to join CISA for 2-3 years to learn what we do, the value that we bring. And then you may go back to the private sector and work in an energy company or a water company or in academia, but you're still part of that collective defense of the nation, because cyber is truly, truly a team sport. We need amazing partners in the private sector. We need amazing talent in government to defend our nation. But this is really about a diversity of experience. And if you've not had an opportunity to work in the public sector before, I really encourage it, because it's an amazing place to be part of it. The potential impact that you can make by working in government is, again, really unbeatable. And we are at CISA working hard to enable us to attract the best and the brightest from the private sector. In addition to the CTMS program, the Cyber Talent Management System program that I mentioned, which, by the way, does not mandate degrees. I know that's an issue. There's amazing technical and cyber talent, and people may not have gotten a degree. And this is a very unique program that you can join without having even a bachelor's degree. So again, if you're interested, it's up on our webpage on the DHS Cybersecurity Service. But we're also trying to be really innovative and working to bring in experts in other ways. So we recently launched the Cyber Innovation Fellows Initiative to level up our operational collaboration with industry. And that brings in private sector experts on a short-term, part-time basis to lend their expertise to some of our most critical teams. And fellows come in, they share their wisdom, their perspective, their skills, and then they gain a better understanding of the cyber threat landscape from the government's view. And so we've been able to welcome fantastic talent through that program as well. And so, and that's not permanently in government. That's a view from the private sector into government. And then, if people want to join us permanently for a couple years, they can do that as well. And so, finally, what I'd say is, as you consider a job in government, look absolutely at the mission, but also look at the culture of the organization. I strongly believe that any great organization is grounded in a great culture. And we've been working very deliberately on defining the culture that we have here at CISA, our core values, our core principles. You can see it if you go to cisa.gov/culture. And it's built all around a recognition that people are our most important asset. That's why we hired the government's first agency chief people officer, Dr. Elizabeth Kolmstetter, who joined us from NASA to help advance our people first culture. And it's really about creating an environment of psychological safety where people can be their authentic self, where they feel cared for and supported and empowered and always treated with dignity and respect, where they have a sense of ownership for mission and where they welcome accountability and responsibility for their actions. And it also means a diverse workforce that we draw from the broadest segments of society, so that we have that diversity of backgrounds and education and perspective and experience. And that really allows us to have the diversity of thought and problem solving that will enable us to really be able to defend the American people and our nation against the most serious cyber threats that we face. A last word on that. You know, in this organization, in CISA, we are a partnership agency. We don't collect intel. We're not law enforcement. We're not a regulator. We're not military. And so everything we do is by, with, and through partners, with the private sector, with state and local, with international partners, with academia, with the research community. And it means that we need really technical people, but it also means that we need really kind, collaborative people. And that's something about being a good cultural fit for the organization while also having incredible technical skills. And that's really because of our unique place in the cyber ecosystem, because we're so partner forward. So I would just say, like, that's one thing for me that's really important. We're also looking for very kind, collaborative people. That's I'd put that out there for anybody who's thinking about joining. Now, as you may have suspected, all to say, please consider joining public service. Someone who's made the jump from government to industry, back to government again, I can assure you that the work is super impactful and will be well worth your time. You know, and again, while we love to retain great talent, even if you only come into government for 2 or 3 years, go back and forth like Mudge did, it is well worth it to bring your talents and your skills to government to help us be successful for the defense of the nation. So if you're interested in government, if you're interested in CISA specifically, our team, I've got teams on here. Please visit cisa.gov/careers to learn about the myriad of jobs that we have available, specific openings. And, you know, I'm always happy to follow up with anybody. I really really appreciate Tech2Gov for putting this amazing event together. I can feel the energy from everybody out there. I'm excited to hear how it all goes. So thanks so much for the time, Andreen.
Thank you, Director Easterly. That was a wonderful set of grounding comments for us. I just want to highlight just a couple of things that you said that I think are really, really stellar, which is the recognition that we are looking for individuals with a blend of technical as well as people-oriented skills. That's something that folks don't often think about, which is that we are looking for interdisciplinary folks. That's really wonderful to hear. And then also the points around kind of acknowledging the pain points, but also acknowledging the changes and the improvements that have been made to be really responsive. I think it's wonderful to hear about the Cyber Innovation Fellows and the Cyber Talent Management. Those are wonderful examples of folks working to transform government so that it's much more responsive to the needs of people, which is what you centered in your conversation. So thank you again. And I would love to take this opportunity to invite our 3 top leaders to join us. These are 3 individuals who have previously or recently made the jump to and from public service. Love to have you all here. Thank you for joining us. Kathy Pham, Rick Clow, and Amaya Capeyan. At New America, we define public interest tech as using your technical knowledge and skills to help to develop public benefits or to promote the public good. For us, that work is often focused on developing the talent, helping us to think about how we are centering and responding to community needs through your technical skills. And the wonderful thing that Director Easterly pointed out, your people skills as well. So each of you have held executive positions in well-known tech companies and also have served or recently joined the government. We have hundreds of people here today considering a transition from tech to gov. Many may not have considered the nuances between tech and government, and we would love for you to share your insights. Please briefly introduce yourself and tell us how you define public interest tech and the tech versus gov ecosystem. Let's start with you, Rick.
Thanks, Andreen. It's a pleasure to be here and really a privilege to share the virtual stage with both Amaya and Kathy. Quick intro, founder and CEO of a climate tech startup company called Ensemble. Most recently, I was the Chief Technology Innovation Officer for the state of California. Before that, I had a long career at Google and got to Google through an acquisition of a startup. I think you said something really interesting and resonated for me. When I made the transition, I left the Google campus in late 2020, was intending to take some time off. And actually, it was thanks to someone I think is, I saw her name on the attendee chat, Jen Anastasiov from the Tech Talent Project, who introduced me to the team at the state of California that was working on the COVID response while I was trying to figure out what I was going to be when I grew up. And the team was looking for help. And I thought, I have no public health experience. I certainly had no government experience at the time. But what became immediately clear was that it was much more of a data and systems challenge in this particular group that I was pulled into and got a chance to work alongside Angie Cararte as well. The transition was actually pretty seamless. Like what I found was a familiarity with how systems at scale work or don't, and where the connectivity between those systems and the people, in this case, the residents of the state of California, were reliant and dependent, was very similar to what it felt like back in the day when I was a product manager, trying to figure out what the product needed to be, what it shouldn't be, and who our users were. If anything, one of the real joys of the role at the state that I started as a volunteer and then got asked to stick around, was recognizing that we didn't get to choose our users. Our users, by virtue of the fact of where they lived, were our residents, and it was our job to serve all of them and meet them where they were. And that, for me, was a really fantastic way of reframing what my responsibility was. So I'll pause there, but I found it to be a pretty seamless transition.
Kathy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Pham. I am the daughter of 2 Vietnamese refugees, and I think a lot about how that shaped growing up, whether I knew it or not, the role that government played in my life. And so when I went to study computer science and went down that career path, I knew it was going to reconcile in some way, because in my whole life, government had a role, whether it was in making sure my parents were here, in food and housing assistance when we needed help, in aid when I needed it when I went to college, and so many other factors. And I think when I realized that I could reconcile the two of them, it became this really magical moment, because when I studied computer science and I cared about public interest, it was computing for good or go to a foundation. And this sounds so silly now when I say it to myself, but the government, which is the largest public sector and the largest public interest and the largest place to do social good and impact, y'all, it didn't cross my mind. And so I had spent, the first 10 years at Google and IBM and other places building large-scale stuff like search and Google Health and large hospital systems. And one day, thankfully, I think many others before me created the space to come into government. Folks like Erie Meyer and Vivian Grobard and Haley Van Dyke and Jennifer Anastasov, who's here, Jen Polka, and so many others who created not just the U.S. Digital Service and 18F and Presidential Innovation Fellows, but the groups that came before that, Code for America, and other groups that laid the foundation for what we now think of as this movement. Create that space to say, oh, you care about thinking about social services and tech? Here's a place to go. You care about food insecurity or taxes or any number of topics, Social Security, veterans, Department of Defense and our military. There's so many different components. These are all different projects I worked on in different ways. There's a place to go. And that's what I think about when I think about public interest tech. It wasn't like what I was doing in the private sector. It didn't have any component of the public interest. And then FE, I think, Andreen, you've taught me this too. We actually have to think about our roles in the private sector as having a public interest component, because tech is so large now that we touch so many members of the public. It's part of the role that I recently took on the last month at Workday. We think about being the digital backbone, digital infrastructure for so many organizations. And that's what the government is. the government is our backbone. And now the technology piece of it is not something that we can ignore. There's a technology piece of every single part of government. And we need the tech folks to be there to build out the technical backbone and the technical infrastructure across all aspects. So similar to what the others have mentioned as well, wherever you go, there are places we can take our skills to build that foundation and to think about our responsibility to all the people that we serve across all the different kinds of services that the government offers. So I'll stop there and pass it on to Maya.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, so quick intro for me is I honestly, if you told me 6 months ago that I'd be speaking here, I'd be a little suspicious, but also could see how that could be true. So I am not even 3 months into my career in the public sector. I am now the CIO for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, one of a few commonwealths in our country. So we never say state, but that's okay. So as CIO, I lead a pretty vast organization. There's 1,400 employees. There's about $1.3 billion in tech spend. It ranges from IT infrastructure. So we have 80,000 workforce. It's how do we make sure all of those folks have Wi-Fi, cell service, let alone the actual tools that they, use to deliver agency services like, signing up for an employment. So it's a really big, exciting organization for a big state. And I think it was a really exciting leap to take. And I think we'll talk more about that as we get into the conversation. Prior to that, I spent 20 years in the private sector, spent a lot of time at startups where the mottos were often, oh, we can ask for forgiveness later. Now, I then joined Comcast as a regulated, company that I think went through the transformation of becoming a technology company and is still going through that in many ways. I understood that at scale, you can't quite ask for forgiveness. You have to, and I think that's also the case in government too. We have true responsibility to our citizens, and we have to proceed carefully. However, when I think about this tech versus gov ecosystem, I think what the common denominator, building a little bit on what both Rick and Kathy have said, is this, we're all technologists here and we have an incredible skill set, and government is just the next industry, like you said, Kathy, that is the next to really embrace, the tool set that we've known works really well, agile ways of working, a product operating model, human-centered design. If we think about, Comcast 10 years ago started investing a ton of money because they knew they had a customer experience problem, right? And it's been paying dividends. It's still in progress, but banking was an industry that wasn't born out of, that's been around probably as long as government, and they've embraced technology, and now we're just taking pictures of our checks and doing everything online, and so big revolution there. I think government is the next, and it's those ways of working that bridge the private sector and government today. But the exciting part is we're still kind of on the frontier of that transformation and that bridge. And I think it's a really, really exciting place to be.
And can I just add one thing?
Sure.
That made me think of something, which is not just that we're the next, but the government has been the place for the innovation, right? With GPS, space,
Right.
Electronic health records. So,
Yeah.
I mean, been like the innovation place. Okay, move on.
Oh no, I absolutely affirm your choice to let people know that government has often been the innovation space. I think that's something that we always have to ensure that people remember and recall. And Rick was the one to say the very internet. So a good reminder that innovation does and can happen in government. I also appreciated you all understanding the context of expanding the frame of who users are. I think that if you're coming from other sectors, we're often using the language of users, but for you all to understand that the government piece is the American people. and meeting them where they are. And so recognizing that they may not be the most sophisticated user or the early adopter of a thing. So I think that naturally leads us to my next question for you is, what type of social issues do you see being addressed or explored as a result of having more technical talent in the public sector? Amaya, you sort of hinted at it when you said, banks are now conceiving themselves as technology company to meet people's needs. So I want to come back around to you, Rick, and start off with, what are some of the social issues you tackled, and then how do you think having more technical talent could help us advance that work?
I mean, the very first one that comes to mind has to do with identity, because so much of everything from benefits to access to qualification to confirmation to application, like all of the things start with a very basic question: who are you? Mm-hmm. And can I, as in this case, the government agency department, can I rely on that knowledge and verify, validate that you are who you say you are? A lot of that was being handed off to the private sector, and somewhat famously over the last couple of years, with quite a bit of blowback. Where why is the government relying on this private venture-backed company who's charging taxpayers for the ability to identify themselves? We spun up an initiative while I was at the state, building out a digital identity framework that was open source by default, that was always intended from first principles to ensure that it was not a paid service, that it was not farming out any of that work to third parties, that it was privacy and security oriented by default. And it actually, the first launch was one of the more boring launches that was one of the most fantastic examples of how government can solve a problem simply. And it had to do with senior citizens paying for bus fare in Monterey, California, because the bus system had moved to contactless payment. The problem was, if you were paying with your bank card, there was no way to know that you were of a certain age that would qualify you for a reduced fare. But the digital ID platform launched and allowed you to marry your age verification, which was done through a round trip through the DMV system, which knew your age, and bound that card number to your digital identity. So the next time that senior citizen tapped with their card when they got on the bus just knew to charge them a lower fare. And it was such a simple, elegant, to your point, meeting users where they were. I guarantee you 100% of the beneficiaries of that process never thought about the words digital identity. And all they really wanted to know was, why is the bus charging me more money than I should be paying? Because I'm 75 years old and I'm riding the bus, damn it. And you should know that I shouldn't pay full fare. And they're right. So coming up with an infrastructure that supports that kind of, how can we know who you are? How can we be smart about using that knowledge to then ensure you're getting the services you're entitled to? When I think about the way you frame the question, like, unpack, that requires infrastructure, that requires SRE support so that the system always works. It requires privacy, security. It requires thinking defensively. Who would try to abuse the system, and how can we preemptively defend against that? And then how can we partner with private sector? Because we have to go to the payment systems and make sure that they would allow us to sort of piggyback on their payment rails to ensure that we could attach this age verification. So things like that, for me, that feels so elemental to all of the downstream delivery of services government has to do. That was the one I was probably most proud of, and very happy to know that it is carried on well after I left.
Amaya.
So in terms of a social issue, I think I'd take it kind of in a broad way. And Rick, I totally agree that a lot of innovation is taking really complex technology and delivering impact in everyday lives. So kind of building on that thread, I think it's all about how we can show that we can establish trust in how government can support all citizens in their everyday lives. I think, absolutely don't want to discount government for driving lots of innovative things, but my favorite kind of innovation, I think, based on my background as well, is delivering great experiences for people, right? And I think I speak kind of just from the product mindset for that. So for me, it's what's yet to come in government is to sort of go across. For example, there's 33 agencies that we support, right, that deliver so many different services. So how can it be, to Rick's point, like just simple, like I'm a senior, I have a discounted fare, let me pay that, right? But when you make great digital experiences, when you leverage massive data sets responsibly, when you use kind of identity frameworks, when you use human-centered design and thinking about like what's the user experience, not just on a website, but more broadly, that's how you get to the impact that the agencies that we support are really trying to deliver, right? And I think just trust happens by consistently showing up for people, right? It's a little thing when when your DMV visit ends up being 5 minutes and not 2 hours, but it's also when you're in a time of need and crisis and you're not asked to fill out 20 different forms, or your application doesn't go into a black hole, right? I think to me, I think that's the big theme, and that's the big impact is that there's so many different interactions that people have with government, whether or not they realize it, and they don't have to, right? But it's about us working through our teams, with our partners to incrementally and at scale change how this all works.
Kathy, any final words around that question?
Yes, it's the government. We serve the public, right? So it's all social issues, and I actually see a lot of our roles as ways to complement. So how do we go in and not think of only ways that tech will solve social issues, but how do we go in, understand the bureaucracy, not accept it all, accept maybe some of it that exists, so that we're responsible to the human lives that we're responsible for, then figure out ways around it. So I think often when I think about, which social issues, it's like, Amaya, you mentioned this, everything from taxes to DMV to immigration, to Social Security, to veterans getting access to healthcare. These are all the social issues. And to what extent, whether it's understanding user experience or understanding infrastructure enough, so you build a system so that people don't now need to use Google spreadsheets or Excel spreadsheets to replace your system because it's too complicated to use. And to pair all that together and to be able to sit in the room with other public servants, other folks who've been in government for a while, and be another voice in the room and say, you know what, it's okay to sunset that program. Or that identity program, have we thought about it this way? Or there's this piece of technology we can use, or you know what, that vendor has been pulling the wool over people's eyes for years, and they're doing this in this country and this other country, and they're doing it here too. And we're the voice in the room to really help figure out how to use tech in these very social scenarios with really smart public servants who've been working for a long time, who deeply understand the social issues in ways that I wish my teams in the private sector understood even remotely closely. So when we launched Google Health, I wish we understood healthcare the way that some people in government understood healthcare. Like there's a depth of understanding of users that I have learned being in government that I take back to the private sector that I think is really missing actually in the private sector. And then I'll also add that we often talk about services that we build for the American people. There are people outside of American citizenship who have to use our websites and our services as well. And it becomes our responsibility to figure out how to build for these different groups too. And that makes for really large, gnarly, complicated problem that I think many of those who come into government really dive into.
So I just want to give our viewers a heads up that we are also open to questions. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I'm going to give a little bit of time for that, but I want to round out with our panelists with a final question, which is while you were serving in your public sector role, what was your why? You know, why did you decide to make the pivot? I'd love to get into that. But I think I just wanted to address one thing that I think you all mentioned, which in some sense is a tricky thing, right? Which is if it works well, the labor of government can be really invisible. And the seamlessness in which Rick, your example, worked. And so I think that can sometimes be a tricky thing for folks to figure out who gets the credit for something working, right? And so I think what you've all described is the ability for government to ensure that people are having kind of a seamless interaction throughout their day, from getting on the train to or a bus. So I just want to sort of offer that up for folks as a moment of reflection as you think about all of the sort of wonderful interactions you've had with government, that and all the people who made that happen, and how seamlessly it happened. So I'm coming back around to you, Rick. I'm always starting with you. What's your why?
So as I mentioned in my intro, I spent almost 14 years working at Google and was fortunate in that time to work on a couple of fairly high profile projects, some of which involved working alongside the founders. And Sergey one day said something in passing. He'd probably said it before, but it deeply hit me, which was, we're talking about, we basically had a choice to make. We could work on A or B. And he said, look, the likelihood of a team achieving a thing is completely disconnected from how hard it is. It's just team dynamics are such that teams sometimes succeed, sometimes fail. So if you take that, then you may as well work on the harder, potentially more impactful thing, because you might actually succeed. And if you do, then your likelihood of having impact goes way up. And as I was getting ready to leave Google and try and figure out what I was going to do next, the opportunity very organically showed up to help the state of California work on its COVID response. And I realized that this was a privilege to work on the most important thing in the state of California at the time. People were dying. We didn't have vaccines yet. We weren't yet out of the woods. And I was being invited to help. And my why, while I was there, was realizing that by luck, by being in the right place at the right time, by having had conversations with folks who knew to connect me, that I was in a position to help. And probably my single proudest day, we had launched, for any of you in California who might have gotten your QR code when you got your vaccine and your proof of vaccination, was a system that my team built. And somebody texted me a picture outside of a bar in San Francisco shortly after the state had relaxed its COVID restrictions, and you could go indoors again, you could congregate in public again. And this bar had printed up a QR code sending people to the government's website so that you could prove you'd been vaccinated, so you could get inside the bar, have a drink, and socialize. And we didn't ask them to do that. It didn't even occur to us that people, bar owners, restaurant owners, shop owners would do this. But it was a moment, sort of, Andreen, to your point about, we had built a thing that worked. It was invisible. It just happened. It gave people the ability to put their QR code on Apple Wallet and they could just go about their day. And I realized that but for our work and our focus and our delivery, that might not have happened. And fewer people might have been able to go out and sort of live their lives again. It was a privilege to be in that position. I realized, I learned something about myself, that I like working on the hardest problems, the ones that have the least guarantee a success, but the highest possible return on impact. And it just happened to be that through that opportunity, I found myself in the middle of working on an extraordinarily hard problem that mattered greatly to the people of California, and it was a gift.
So, Kathy, and then Amaya, and then I have just a question or so from the audience that I'd love to get back to you.
The why. I'll talk about the work, and I'll also talk about personal reasons, because that's why we take on jobs. The chance to go somewhere where I think your skills are applied differently. I think a lot about our life career as same as you go, but then same skills applied in different environments is incredibly powerful, especially as you hone those skills on how to take those skills in different environments. So for me, it was come to the U.S. Digital Service, go into agencies, help figure out the lay of the land, and help figure out how to solve those problems. It was to go take those same skills, go into the Federal Trade Commission, an enforcement agency with 1,100 lawyers, and now we created, under Stephanie Wynn's leadership, a group of 10 technologists. But to go apply your skills that way in a different environment and be immensely useful. It was to go run the National AI Advisory Committee, something that was never existed before, right? It's to bring that cross-disciplinary background. And I think you can really make a lot of impact that way. And I think on a personal level, it's tremendous growth, right? I've grown so much learning from the public servants and the bureaucracy and the complexities of these environments that I couldn't have gotten anywhere else. And then I also took the USDS role at the same time. I actually took the USDS role when my mom's cancer was in remission and it came back. And I'll never forget that moment of getting to work on electronic health record systems in the US government, where electronic health record systems originated and is now a big mess, while living inside electronic health record systems inside Sanford Cancer Center with my mom week over week, and seeing how my worlds tied together that way. And it gave me a lot of purpose. And also gave me a lot of understanding for how government and private sector isn't really a versus. There's so much overlap, and those who kind of go between the both can really help bridge that world as well. So that continues to be one of my whys.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, I'll kind of plus one, as it were. A few of the points are made. I think, Rick, while it wasn't what I initially thought, but it resonates deeply, the desire and drive to work on the hardest problems. That's very much true. And I think, Kathy, I think you kind of said two words that I'll repeat: growth and impact, right? I think are two, and then I'll talk about a third for me, which is diversity as well. I think the growth, there's so many dimensions of growth. For me personally, I was an executive at Comcast, but I wasn't a C-level leader of an organization. And that was where I knew that I wanted to go as a leader. And this afforded me the chance and opportunity. So, it's also, as Kathy, as you said, bringing that digital transformation skill set to a brand new place. And I know that I can't just run my plays from private sector. I'm learning so much about how government works, what's different, the different ways of working, what's getting in the way, what's challenging, all those things. So I'm learning. I keep telling my team, I don't know, it depends on the day. I'm learning in 3 dimensions. I'm learning in 10 dimensions, because I'm learning about the services that agencies deliver. I'm learning about, our cloud compute services and our transition from mainframes. I'm learning about cybersecurity, AI, and, just how to get help desk support for a problem I have. It's just, it's incredibly exciting. I feel my brain stretching every day. So just truly, I think also the scale of impact, right? I think we've all talked about that here, but that's very real. And then I'll spend a minute on the last point. For me, as a gay Latina woman working in tech, diversity has always been critically important for me. Many times been the only in a room in the private sector. Interestingly, I found there's more women in tech and in government, which is awesome to see. But part of my why was, in my career, I've had moments where I can make the jump to a new level opportunity, and what has happened every time is I've been able to drive more diversity and bring more diversity with me. As a leader of a team, that is going to be a focus of how we think about talent for Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I want to absolutely, I think there's such a huge opportunity as we're here today to speaking to all of you. There's so much great talent out there and so much diverse talent, and so excited to inspire more of you to make this jump.
So I think in a wonderful way, you all have kind of responded to a couple of questions that came up in the chat. So this is great. I'm not ignoring audience questions, but I'd love for you to dive a little bit deeper into one that I think folks are asking about, which is, I'm curious about the hardest adjustment when transitioning from private to public sector. Maya, you were getting at a little bit of that. And how did you learn and manage the change for yourself? I'd love for each of you to speak but give some tips and tricks a little bit as we come towards the end so that folks are able to hear and take some notes. I'll go back to you, Amaya, if you can talk about some of the adjustments and ways that you were able to do.
Sure, it's all happening right now.
Exactly.
So I think some of the adjustments, and I think it's come up based on some of the things you said, like Rick, you started saying that we have to serve every citizen, right? I think in private sector, there's, you're chasing markets, right? You're chasing users, so you can be very strategic about who responds best to your product initially, right? So that I was aware that very much was true. But I think some of the adjustment is just a lot of the mechanisms in government are tuned because of that, right? So I think also I made a comment about my background earlier on in startups, right? Sort of ask for forgiveness. We have an immense responsibility, right? And I think there's a lot of risk that we have to mitigate in government, right? So I think one of the biggest adjustments is just getting used to what are the mechanisms and ways that there's a lot of, we're mitigating risk for our citizens. And there's a lot to sort through there. That's just different from the private sector, right? And I think just the other piece is just getting used to, I knew the subject matter of where I worked in different companies. I don't know the ins and outs of how government works, and I'm learning that on the job, but that's just an area of expertise that I'm building like any other. In terms of what's helping me get through this, I think one thing that I'll call out on all of these things is something I saw as I was getting recruited, and it has come to be true, is this GovTech community is incredible. So I've, Tech Talent Project is how I got here. And, they're a great resource to connect me to amazing people that I can speak to, that'll pick up the phone or hop on a Zoom or meet or whatever, and talk through and help me sort through. So there's a real vibrant community of folks in government, have been in government, and I've already started to tap into those, and you feel really supported, and it's very unique from the private sector, right? You're not really chatting to your competitors or people in similar positions. So.
Well, thank you, Amaya. I hate to end this, but this is just getting good. But I want to respect everyone's time. And I just want to thank you all for joining us as panelists. Kathy Pham, Rick Clow, Amaya Kapayan has had so many wonderful things to share. And I also want to thank you all for joining us online. Thank you for joining us for Tech to Gov. I think you have to take Amaya's note. Reach out to your friends and your colleagues who've done this work and allow them to shepherd you through this process. Goodbye.
Thank you.